All I've ever wanted in life, all I've ever wanted in my life are three simple things: a quiet place to call my own, a fishing rod, and not a single soul within 100 miles. But fate, that meddlesome thing, always has a way of flipping things upside down. It dumped a blood-soaked stranger right at my doorstep. It was a perfect, lazy morning. Sunlight filtered through pine boughs, scattering golden shards across the ground. The air smelled of damp moss and sweet, unbridled freedom. I was fully immersed in my one true calling, doing absolutely nothing. A fishing rod in hand, my bare feet soaking in the pond's cool water, and Little Turnip snoring contentedly by my side. Little Turnip was a tiny dog, small enough to curl up in a rice sack, but he ate like a bandit and had a brain as mushy as overcooked cabbage. Still, he had one redeeming quality: unwavering loyalty. I was brainstorming a poem about the art of catching no fish when something crashed through the bushes. At first, I thought it was a wild boar. Then I saw the boots, fine, well-crafted boots, their owner stumbling unsteadily toward the pond. He staggered 2 steps, his gaze locking onto mine like I was a deity sent to save him, then crumpled face-first into the mud. Ugh. As if this mountain forest wasn't noisy enough already. I sighed in resignation. Little Turnip let out a half-hearted bark, his tiny face twisted in disdain. An arrow jutted from the stranger's shoulder, the wound clean and precise, blood oozing steadily through his torn black silk robe embroidered with subtle cloud patterns and trimmed with gold thread. He was no bandit, that much was clear. He was too clean, his hands smooth and uncalloused, free of scars. A man like him probably hadn't touched anything rougher than a teacup in his entire life. I prodded him with a twig. He grunted. Miraculously, he was still alive. TCH. Bad luck, if you ask me. You nobles really have a knack for passing out in the most inconvenient spots, I muttered, setting down my fishing rod. I tore a strip of cloth from my sleeve, dipped it in the pond water, wiped the blood from his wound, then yanked the arrow out in one swift motion. He gasped in agony, his eyes snapping open, dark, sharp, and blazing with anger. "You," he began, only to be cut off by me. Yes, I'm just a rude mountain bumpkin who hurt you and ruined your precious robe." "You're welcome," I retorted. He froze, clearly unused to such ungrateful rescues. The bleeding finally slowed. I stepped back, crossing my arms over my chest. "Spit it out. Who shot you? Or did you tick off some bored archer with too much time on his hands?" "I was ambushed by bandits," he replied stiffly, his voice deep and melodious, laced with the refined cadence of the imperial court, a sound utterly out of place in this wilderness. "Bandits? Probably after that fancy robe of yours," I snorted, eyeing the garment again. If this was what he called low-key, then a peacock fanning its tail was a hermit. His jaw tightened, like he wanted to argue but deemed me beneath his dignity. TSK. Gutsy, but not exactly bright. The air hung thick with tension, until Little Turnip decided to play peacemaker. He trotted over, grabbed one of the stranger's boots in his mouth, and darted off like he'd stolen a priceless treasure. "Little Turnip, that thing isn't edible," I yelled after him. The stranger tried to sit up, only to collapse back into the mud with a grunt, his strength completely drained. "Your dog," he said through gritted teeth. Puppy. I corrected him. "He's young. Manners aren't his strong suit." He shot me a glare, the same haughty look nobles reserve for insolent servants, a mix of contempt and scrutiny. "Aren't you going to stop him?" "I try." Keyword, try. He let out a sharp huff, a sound so dramatic, it could have been the theme song for every spoiled royal who'd never been told no in their life. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I hauled him over to the campfire and dumped a spare cloak on him, then stirred the soup simmering in the pot. "Hungry?" He hesitated, then nodded. I handed him a bowl. He sniffed it suspiciously, like I'd laced it with poison. "Relax. If I wanted you dead, I wouldn't waste perfectly good ingredients on you," I said. He stared at me, half believing, half doubting. To be honest, I wasn't even sure if I meant it myself. Silence stretched on for minutes before he spoke again. "Do you live here?" "I just exist here." "Life sounds too grand for this," I corrected him. "Are you a hermit?" "Let's just say I like my peace and quiet," I shrugged. He fell silent, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. The moon crept up the treetops, and crickets began their nightly chorus in the woods. After a long while, he spoke again, his voice soft. "Thank you for saving me." I shrugged. "Don't mention it, seriously. I've got a reputation for being a loner, and you're kind of ruining it. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close enough. You're a strange man, he said. I prefer the carefree, wise sage of the mountains. But strange works too, I grinned. No sooner had the words left my mouth than Little Turnip trotted back, the stolen boot now caked in mud and covered in tooth marks, held proudly in his jaws. I sighed again. See? Takes after his owner, collects all the stuff nobody else wants. The stranger tilted his head back inside, a sound of resigned defeat, muttering something about fate's cruel jokes. I pretended not to hear. As night fell, he drifted off to sleep by the fire. By the flickering light, I studied him closely. Even covered in mud and pale as a ghost, his nobility shone through, like an expensive perfume, impossible to wash off. He was born to rule, to stand high above the masses and give orders. Not to bleed out in the mud, keeping company with a nobody like me. This was trouble with a capital T. I should have left him for dead. I really should have. But Little Turnip had already curled up at his feet, his tail wagging gently, looking utterly content. Well, there it was. My dog had made the decision for me. Fine. Once his wound healed, he could fend for himself. Because fate, that old trickster, was already sharpening its claws, waiting to laugh at my misfortune. Dawn broke with a brightness that bordered on obnoxious. My honored guest woke up, slowly propping himself up, and frowned at the pond. His silk robe, now clean, was hanging on a rock to dry, no longer looking like a tattered rag salvaged from a battlefield. Morning. Still kicking, I see. Congratulations, I said, stretching lazily. He shot me a frosty glance. You sound disappointed that I'm alive. Guilty as charged, I admitted cheerfully. You bleed all over my place, drink my soup, and probably attract arrow storms wherever you go. You're a walking disaster magnet. I can leave, he said stiffly. Be my guest, if you can stand up, that is. And if you don't mind missing a boot. Little Turnip chose that moment to yawn loudly, as if seconding my words. He glared at the puppy, then back at me. You have absolutely no manners. Manners are for people who deserve them. You're just a stranger who passed out during my breakfast time. I smiled, utterly unapologetic. His eyes flashed with a mix of anger, pride, and something else I couldn't quite place. You're impossible to tolerate. Thanks for the compliment. We locked eyes, neither backing down. He was all sharp edges and unyielding pride. I was all lazy indifference, not bothering to rise to the bait. Then, suddenly, he laughed. A short, surprised chuckle, like it had escaped against his will. I froze. Careful. Laugh too much, and people might mistake you for a normal human being, I said. He ignored me, his gaze drifting to the pond. What's your name? Liang Yun, known in the Jianghu as the walking trouble magnet. Xiao Yan, a humble scholar, traveling the land to broaden my horizons. He paused, the insincerity practically dripping from his words. I raised an eyebrow. What a coincidence. I'm the Emperor's personally appointed royal fishing instructor. His expression turned awkward in an instant. I grinned. Relax, Master Xiao. Your secret's safe with me. As long as you stop bleeding into my pond, I couldn't care less who you really are. He shook his head helplessly, another faint smile tugging at his lips. The sun climbed higher in the sky. He leaned against a tree, closing his eyes to rest. Little Turnip curled up at his feet, snoring louder than ever. I leaned against another tree, half asleep, thinking that maybe this day wasn't so bad after all. There are two things I hate most in this world: being interrupted during breakfast, and bandits. The first sign of trouble was the crunch of dry leaves under boots, loud, clumsy, nothing like the quiet tread of a hunter or the disciplined step of a soldier. I was stirring a pot of porridge, enjoying my leisurely morning of doing nothing, when my scholar companion beside me tried to pretend that moving his shoulder didn't hurt like hell. We've got company, I said. He blinked, confused. Most likely bandits. Or maybe my adoring fans. I am quite handsome, after all, I said deadpan. He shot me a look, exactly the kind of disdainful stare a royal would give a cheeky commoner. We should prepare ourselves, he said. You prepare. I'll watch. Spectating is great for the soul. I yawned. The bushes rustled violently, and 6 burly men burst out, reeking like a sewer. They wielded rusty swords, their faces twisted in arrogant sneers, amateurs, plain and simple, who'd never fought anyone worth their salt. Hand over your money, or else, their leader roared, brandishing his sword. "Do I look like I have money?" I asked, pointing to my tattered, patched-up linen robe. His eyes narrowed, landing on Xiaoyan. "That kid looks loaded." I sighed. "Congratulations. You just signed your own death warrant." Xiaoyan tensed up instantly, and I could almost hear the royal pride simmering beneath his skin. "Hide behind me," he said in a low, commanding voice. "Nah, you go first. You've read all those books, surely you can handle this," I said, smiling innocently. The first bandit lunged at me, sword swinging. I sidestepped easily, kicking him hard in the back of the knee. He went sprawling into the pond with a splash. Another bandit tried to grab me. I tossed my porridge spoon at his face, then swept my fishing rod across his legs, sending him crashing to the ground. Lazy but efficient counterattacks, my specialty. Rule number 1 of survival: run if you can, don't fight if you don't have to. Wasting energy on brute force when you can use gravity and the enemy's stupidity? That's just plain dumb, I lectured, dodging another swing of a sword. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw Xiaoyan, still not bothering to call him by his real name, pull a sword from his luggage. A real sword, not some flimsy scholar's dagger. His movements were crisp, fluid, deadly, every strike aimed for a vital spot. That kind of ferocity was enough to ruin my perfectly peaceful morning. My fist froze mid-punch. Whoa. He noticed my stare, and his movements suddenly turned clumsy, like a drunk goat stumbling around. Too late. I'd already seen everything. The last bandit screamed and fled into the forest. I brushed the dust off my sleeves and turned to Xiaoyan. Not bad for a scholar. Or should I say, a liar. He stiffened. "I studied under a martial arts master." "Oh really? Was that master the ghost of some legendary general who just happened to teach a random scholar lethal swordsmanship for free?" His jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. "Can't you be serious for once?" "I'm only sarcastic when things are ridiculous, and everything about you is ridiculous," I retorted. Just then, Little Turnip trotted back, holding a bandit's glove in his mouth like a trophy. I patted his head. "Good boy." "As useless as ever." My scholar swordsman glared at me. "Can't you say thank you?" I did. "I didn't let you get shot with another arrow." "That's my thank you gift," I said. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, looking like he was torn between strangling me and lecturing me. Being the sensible one, I decided to drop the subject. By noon, we'd set up camp by a river. The water was clear and shallow, cool enough to wash off the stench of bandits clinging to our clothes. I was skipping stones across the surface when I heard a splash behind me. I turned to see Xiaoyan squatting by the riverbank, struggling to scrub the bloodstains from his robe, only making them worse. "Stop that! You're ruining the fabric," I said, rushing over. He glanced up, his expression sour. "I don't need your help. I can do this myself. You nobles are so helpless. Take you out of your gilded cages, and you can't survive 5 minutes on your own." I scoffed. "I am not a noble," he said, narrowing his eyes, his voice icy. "Right. Just a regular scholar with sword skills better than the Imperial Guards, and who wears perfume more expensive than my entire life savings," I said dryly. The tips of his ears turned pink. "You don't have to be so mean," he muttered. "I know, but watching you flail around like that is giving me chest pains," I said, grabbing the robe from his hands. I dumped it in the river, scrubbed it vigorously with sand from the bank, then tossed it back to him. "There, good as new. Practical, efficient, no nonsense, unlike you." He glared at me, but I just smiled wider. "You're welcome, Master Xiao." He said nothing, probably reciting some royal patience mantra in his head, counting to 10 to keep from losing his temper. That's when Little Turnip launched himself into the river like a cannonball, splashing water all over both of us. Xiaoyan let out a startled yelp. I choked on a mouthful of water, coughing uncontrollably. Little Turnip surfaced triumphantly, tongue lolling, and started chasing his tail in the river. I expected Xiaoyan to fly into a rage. Instead, he laughed. A soft, genuine laugh, all his royal pretense and defenses melting away. I froze. "You can laugh," I said, dumbfounded. He smiled, a faint, warm curve of his lips. "At what?" "At the fact that you finally look like a real person," I said. His smile faded, replaced by a resigned sigh. "Can't you be quiet for just a minute?" "Only if I pass out," I shot back. The sky darkened, dyed a deep indigo. We lit a small campfire, the flames casting flickering shadows across the ground. He sat on the other side of the fire, staring into the flames, his expression unreadable. I watched him for a long time, his tense shoulders, his slightly furrowed brows. Even exhausted, he exuded that natural aura of authority, the kind that makes people want to kneel and obey. "Spit it out. Who are you really?" I finally asked. "You're no wandering scholar." He hesitated. "My mother sent me out to see the world, to experience the hardships of the common people." I snorted. "So hardships include getting shot in the shoulder with an arrow?" He looked at me, his eyes a mix of anger and resignation, maybe a bit of both. "You're too sharp for your own good. Impossible to figure out. That's the point. If people could read me like an open book, half the world would be trying to fix me," I said. Silence fell again, broken only by the crickets chirping and little turnips snoring. I propped my chin on my hand, staring at the moon's reflection in the river. "Honestly, you're spoiled, you lie like a rug, and yet, you're not entirely unbearable." He turned his head slightly. "That's probably the nicest thing you've ever said to me. Don't get cocky. The next one might not be so kind," I warned. A gentle breeze stirred the trees, making the flames dance. The awkwardness and distance between us seemed to melt away, if just a little. We weren't just two strangers thrown together by fate anymore. There was something else. Something soft and unspoken, hanging in the air. He turned to look at me, really look at me, his dark eyes glowing in the firelight, bright and warm and intense. My heart skipped a beat, traitorous and wild. I quickly looked away, pretending to be fascinated by the moon's reflection on the water. Without warning, he leaned a little closer, just a little, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body, smell the faint scent of cedar and campfire smoke on his clothes. My breath hitched, my pulse racing out of control. "Careful," I whispered, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Stare at me like that, and your scholar act is going to fall apart." He didn't pull away, his gaze locked on mine, his voice low and hoarse. "You talk too much." "If I didn't talk, I'd suffocate from the silence," I retorted, my voice softening despite myself. Just then, a loud bark shattered the tender moment. Little Turnip woke up, his tail wagging a mile a minute, clearly proud of himself for ruining the mood. We both jumped back, startled. I couldn't help but mutter a curse under my breath. Xiao Yin cleared his throat, breaking the awkwardness. "You should get some rest." "Right. Nice chat, Master Xiao." "Good night." "Don't sneak over and stab me in my sleep," I said, lying down immediately, afraid I'd say something stupid if I stayed awake any longer. He let out a quiet laugh. "Only if you stop snoring like a bear." "I do not snore." "You snore loud enough to scare off the mountain tigers." I closed my eyes, grabbed a twig, and tossed it at him. "Good night." "Good night, Liang Yun." The way he said my name, soft, tentative, warm, lingered in my heart long after I closed my eyes. I drifted off to sleep to the sound of the river flowing, Little Turnip's steady breathing, and the quiet gaze of the man across the fire, a gaze he thought I didn't notice. The next morning, the mountain forest was eerily quiet, not a bird chirping, not a leaf rustling, not even Little Turnip snoring. That kind of silence meant one of two things: ghosts or soldiers. Given my recent luck, it was definitely the latter. Xiao Yin sat by the fire, staring blankly at the river, looking like he'd lost both his throne and his favorite teacup. I was about to tease him when a loud shout cut through the stillness. "Your Highness! We've found you!" "Your Highness? What Highness?" Before I could process what was happening, 10 armored soldiers burst through the trees, their movements precise and synchronized, elite troops, worlds apart from the ragtag bandits we'd fought off yesterday. They spotted Xiao Yan and immediately dropped to one knee, their voices ringing out in unison. "Your Highness! Thank the heavens you're safe." I looked from the soldiers to Xiao Yan, then back to the soldiers, my brain short-circuiting. Xiao Yan closed his eyes, his face a picture of utter despair, like he'd finally accepted his fate. "No way. You're kidding me, right?" The lead general's face was as grim as if he'd eaten a spear for breakfast. "Your Highness, we've been beside ourselves with worry. The court is in utter chaos without you." "Enough," Xiao Yan said, his voice shifting in an instant, sharp, cold, and commandingly regal, the voice of a born leader. # "I ordered you to guard the northern border, did I not?" The general's lips parted, then clamped shut again the moment his gaze collided with Xiaoyan's. I sat rooted to the spot, my jaw practically hitting the ground. Good grief. I'd been making soup for the most arrogant man in the entire empire for days on end. The general's eyes darted to me, wide with horror, as if a commoner like me was unworthy of breathing the same air as royalty within 10 feet. Who is this man? Xiaoyan lifted a hand, his voice calm and steady. He saved my life. At this, the soldiers bowed in perfect unison, their backs bending so low they might have burrowed into the earth. I waved my hands awkwardly. Whoa! Hold on. I can't stand all this fancy protocol stuff. Xiaoyan's gaze locked onto mine, unwavering. You will come back to the palace with me. My hand froze mid-wave. Pardon? For saving your sovereign, you shall be richly rewarded, with unmatched glory and wealth. Glory? Wealth? Sounds like a gilded cage to me. Forcing me to count out piles of gold and jade, even report every sneeze I make? I rolled my eyes. Thanks. But no thanks. He frowned. You misunderstand. I understand perfectly well. People like you are used to everyone jumping at your command, but I'm not one of them. Little Turnip chose that moment to bark twice, as if backing me up. The general stood by, his face twisted in agony. He looked like he'd rather swallow his own helmet than watch the standoff between ruler and subject. Your Highness, shall I have this man escorted back to the palace? No need. Xiaoyan never took his eyes off me. He rose to his feet, his posture straight and immaculate despite days spent in the wilderness. In every line of his body, for words blazed loud and clear, I own this world. Liang Yun, you saved my life. You cannot simply walk away. Watch me. I'm an expert at 3 things: running, sleeping, and staying far away from palace nonsense. His expression darkened. You think my reward is nonsense? Precisely. The fancy, dangerous kind of nonsense. The air fell silent for a beat. Then his voice dropped, soft yet sharp as a well-honed dagger. You have no idea what you're saying. Saving my life means you hold a debt that can never be repaid. A debt? I saved you because you collapsed in my fishing pond and your blood was about to poison my fish. Was I supposed to just stand there and let you pollute the water? A soldier gasped, as if I'd blasphemed against a god. Xiaoyan's expression remained unchanged, but his eyes turned colder, a royal rage, quiet and understated, yet cold enough to freeze everything around it. Do you always speak so recklessly? Only when I'm awake. Little Turnip trotted over to sniff the general's boots, and the man froze rigid with terror. I picked up the puppy, holding him close as I met Xiaoyan's gaze. Listen, Your Highness. I appreciate the offer, but I'm cut out for palace life about as much as a fish is cut out for climbing trees. I like sleeping under the stars, eating whenever I'm hungry, napping whenever I'm tired, and not worrying about losing my head over a single wrong word. So before you regret letting me save you, let's part ways amicably. He stared at me, his eyes unreadable for a long, long moment. Slowly, the hardness in his gaze softened, but that gentleness unsettled me far more than his anger ever could. I never leave debts unpaid, Liang Yun. Then learn some grace and let it go. Freedom means not owing anyone anything. I expected him to fly into a rage. Instead, the corner of his mouth twitched upward, as if he was fighting back a smile. Alas, the smile never quite reached his eyes. He nodded at the general. The man cleared his throat, pulled out a scroll of imperial edict, and read it at breakneck speed, obviously afraid for his life. By the mandate of heaven, the emperor decrees, Liang Yun saved his sovereign from peril. He is hereby summoned to the palace as an imperial guest of honor, and shall depart immediately. Guest of honor? I scoffed. More like honored prisoner. Xiaoyan's voice was firm. Guest of honor. A guest who can't say no. Clever. I groaned. This isn't a reward, it's kidnapping. Little Turnip barked twice, his tail wagging furiously, as if he thought the whole thing was a game. The soldiers closed in, their smiles polite but their grip unyielding. One soldier reached for my bag. I shot him a glare that could curdle milk. Touch my stuff, and my puppy will take a chunk out of you. The soldiers froze in their tracks. Good. Fear is a useful tool. Xiaoyan took 2 steps toward me, his voice softening. Liang Yun, I wish you would come back with me willingly. Then lower your standards. He sighed, a sound heavy with the helplessness of a royal, as if mourning the stubbornness of my entire bloodline. You are impossibly stubborn. Likewise. You should try it sometime, it's fun. I met his gaze, and for a moment, I was struck by how handsome he was. His eyes were deep and unfathomable, drawing me in with a dangerous allure that made me want to bicker with him for hours, if only to hear his voice a little longer. "Damn it!" The general coughed loudly, breaking the spell. "Your Highness, we must depart before sunset." Xiao Yan's jaw tightened. "Prepare the horses." I stood there, watching them bustle about, my mind racing with escape plans. It was useless, though. I could take on 10 bandits. 10 fully armored soldiers? Not a chance. Besides, Xiao Yan was watching me like a hawk, his gaze daring me to run, as if fleeing would be an insult to his ancestors. Discretion is the better part of valor. So I made my decision, complain all the way to the palace. Normal people say thank you with silver and kind words. I grumbled as a soldier helped me onto a horse. "They don't send an army to kidnap you." Xiao Yan mounted his horse in one fluid motion, as if he'd been born in the saddle. "You will understand my gratitude once we reach the capital." "Oh, I'm sure I will." I'm practically trembling with anticipation. He said nothing, just glanced at me, and a faint smile tugged at his lips. Little Turnip curled up in my arms, his tail still wagging, completely oblivious that his owner was about to be house arrested. The mountains faded into the distance, and the road grew wider and wider. The nightmare called the palace had officially begun. I muttered under my breath, "Should have let you drown in that pond." He tilted his head. "What was that?" "Nothing, Your Highness. Just admiring how your empire does kidnapping with such style and pageantry." To my surprise, he laughed, a low, warm sound that sent my heart racing like a fool. "Shut up, Liang Yun," he said, still smiling. "No promises, Your Highness. If I'm going to be dragged into palace messes, I might as well complain about it." Little Turnip barked in agreement. And just like that, Liang Yun, a man who just wanted to fish, part-time mountain philosopher, became the honored guest of the most dangerous man in the empire. The air in the capital reeked of copper, incense, and sanctimonious hypocrisy. 10 minutes after entering the city, I already regretted it. Everything was too bright: golden roof tiles, red palace walls, marble floors so polished they reflected the sky. Even the people walked with their noses in the air, as if the ground beneath their feet belonged to them. Even the pigeons looked at me with judgmental eyes. Meanwhile, I stood there like a wild boy fresh out of the mountains, covered in dust, holding a puppy, tiptoeing through the palace gates, terrified that a single sneeze would soil some sacred relic. Of course, Little Turnip chose that exact moment to bark furiously at a minister's hat. I swear, the man almost fainted on the spot. Xiao Yan, no, the emperor now, walked ahead, his expression as calm as ever, as if he didn't even know the kidnapped guest trailing behind him. We stopped in front of a grand hall draped in red silk. A swarm of eunuchs and maids swarmed Xiao Yan, fussing over him, wiping his face, changing his robes, desperate to scrub every trace of the mountains from his skin. I stood off to the side, holding Little Turnip, wondering if I'd dug up someone's ancestral grave in a past life to deserve this. Just then, a bejeweled old lady emerged from the hall, her ornaments glinting so brightly they could have blinded a horse. Everyone around us dropped to their knees, their heads bowed low to the ground. "That's the Empress Dowager," someone whispered in my ear. I quickly knelt too, not out of respect, but out of fear for my life. The Empress Dowager's eyes raked over me, as if I were a fish she hadn't decided whether to cook or throw back. "You are the one who saved my grandson?" "Your Majesty, it is indeed me." Much to my misfortune, I blurted out before I could stop myself. "Pfft." Xiao Yan covered his mouth with a cough, but the sound was clearly a suppressed laugh. A sharp glint flickered in the Empress Dowager's eyes. This old lady was definitely not someone to mess with. "You certainly have a bold tongue." "It's a habit, Your Majesty. I talk too much, and I get into trouble everywhere I go. Old habits die hard." She smiled, a regal, icy smile that sent a chill down my spine. "Persistence is a virtue, and a useful one." That was my first warning. I should have turned and run right then and there. But I didn't. The Empress Dowager cleared her throat and announced in a loud voice that echoed through the hall, "To align with the will of heaven, and to quell the rumors of the Emperor's attack, I hereby decree, Liang Yin shall be appointed as the Emperor's personal study companion. Furthermore, he shall be married to the Emperor, with the wedding to be held on a date to be determined." Silence descended over the hall, thick, suffocating silence. My voice shattered it, shrill and disbelieving. What? Did I hear that right? Chaos erupted. Eunuchs and maids gasped. Ministers stared, their mouths agape. Even little Turnip started barking, as if he'd understood the bombshell announcement. I whipped around to glare at Xiaoyan, my voice shaking with rage. "This is all your fault." He looked just as shocked, a sight that made me feel a little better. At least he hadn't known about this either. Too bad I was too flustered to notice the faint, amused glint in his eyes. "Grandmother, this cannot be." Xiaoyan hurried to speak, his tone urgent. The Empress Dowager waved a hand, her voice brooking no argument. "My decision is final. It is the will of heaven, it is the will of heaven. He saved your life, and this is a marriage destined by fate. Has heaven gone blind?" I muttered under my breath. The Empress Dowager ignored me completely. "The wedding shall be held tomorrow. Auspicious hours wait for no one." "Tomorrow? I don't even have a decent pair of shoes." I jumped to my feet. "It matters not. The palace has plenty. They are yours as a gift." The Empress Dowager waved her hand dismissively. And just like that, my freedom was buried beneath piles of red silk and well-meaning decrees. On the wedding day, I was swaddled in layers upon layers of embroidered ceremonial robes. The garment was absurdly heavy, heavier than Little Turnip, and reeked of aged incense. Maids swarmed around me, chattering non-stop about wedding etiquettes. But I didn't catch a single word. The entire ceremony felt like a hazy dream, chanting prayers, bowing to the heavens, kowtowing to ancestors. I spent the whole time worrying about tripping over my own robes. Xiaoyan stood beside me, clad in a bright yellow imperial gown, his features sharp and handsome, the very image of a perfect emperor. Yet hidden in his eyes was a faint, barely perceptible edge of irritation. When we finally finished the last bow, I leaned close to his ear and whispered, "So, am I your political pawn now?" He didn't even bother to lift his eyelids. "You, pawn or not, are far too noisy. Just wait till I get itchy, then you'll know how noisy I can be." He took a deep breath, looking like he regretted every life decision that had led him here. The so-called bridal chamber night was the most humiliating moment of my life. Maids ushered us into a bedroom thick with heady fragrance, lit with countless red candles and draped in red silk. The awkward tension in the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. A maid set a jug of wine on the table, then retreated discreetly, closing the door behind her with a soft click. Xiaoyan and I locked eyes. Neither of us spoke. Well, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. I grabbed the jug and poured myself a bowl of wine. After half the jug was gone, my head started spinning. I stumbled backward and collapsed onto the bed, feeling like the whole world was tilting. Xiaoyan sat stiffly in a chair, his back ramrod straight, as if someone had nailed a plank to his spine. "You're stiffer than a wooden door," I slurred, pointing at him. He frowned. "You're drunk and incredibly tedious." "Likewise. See? We're both masters at spouting nonsense," I announced triumphantly. Little Turnip barked twice from the corner, as if agreeing with me. He sighed. "Go to sleep." "I'm already gonna," I mumbled, then toppled forward, right onto him. Literally. I crashed into him hard. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the gaps in the curtains. My pillow felt warm and soft, rising and falling with steady breaths. I blinked groggily awake, and found myself staring right into Xiaoyan's eyes. He was gazing blankly at the ceiling, his expression so vacant it looked like he was questioning the very meaning of his existence. "Morning, Your Majesty. Sleep well?" I climbed off him cheerfully. He shot me a frosty glare, his eyes sharp enough to shave with. "You snored." "Thanks for the compliment." I stretched lazily, then noticed 3 maids standing by the door, their eyes wide and hands clamped over their mouths to stifle giggles. Sure enough, palace gossip spreads faster than an arrow, I muttered. Should I wave hello to them? "Dare you!" Xiaoyan shot up from the bed, the tips of his ears turning as red as ripe shrimp. "Relax. I'm just messing with you. You're way too easy to fluster." By noon, I was actually starting to enjoy this new life. Being the Emperor's steady companion had its perks: endless delicacies, top-quality tea, and the sheer entertainment of riling up stuffy ministers until their beards twitched with rage. Of course, the downsides were just as obvious: rules and protocols governed every breath you took. Maids and eunuchs dropped to their knees the moment they saw me. Guards watched my every move. Even Little Turnip was gifted a golden collar. I tried to escape, but the palace had more gates than I had patience. I just climbed onto a wall when Xiaoyan caught me red-handed. Running away? He raised an eyebrow at me. Trying to survive. You nobles live such suffocating lives. Rules for standing, rules for sitting, rules for everything. I pouted. A faint smile tugged at his lips. Some people never change. What can I say? If you gag me, I'll die of boredom. He sighed, a sound that carried the distinct warmth of royal indulgence. Get down before the Empress Dowager sees you. She won't mind. She likes me, said I'm a heaven-sent match. I preened. Truly, heaven must have lost its sight. He shot back without hesitation. Finally, we agree on something. That night, we found ourselves wandering the imperial garden together, almost by accident. I sat perched on the wall while he lounged on a stone bench beneath a tree, reading a book by the light of a lantern. Can't you ever relax? I asked him. He didn't look up from his page. Relaxation is a privilege, not a habit. That's your problem. You overthink everything. Learn from me. Do nothing, lie around, zone out. It's great for your mental health. Do nothing? He repeated the words slowly. Yep. At last, he lifted his head. The lantern light glinted in his eyes, making them shine like polished obsidian. With you around, doing nothing is more than enough. Oh, is that a compliment? I grinned. He set his book aside, stood up, and walked toward me until he was just a few steps away. You are utterly impossible. Yet the impossible married you. Must be quite a burden. I sighed dramatically. He stared at me, his gaze deep and unfathomable. Do you regret it? Regret? Nah. The robe's just really itchy. It is, isn't it? He murmured, a hint of laughter in his voice. Excuse me, I'm off to find some wine that doesn't come with a destiny label. I jumped down from the wall and waved goodbye. As I walked away, I could still feel his eyes on my back, warm, intense, burning. Strangely enough, I didn't mind it at all. They say the palace is a place of elegance, dignity, and impeccable decorum. I say it's all a load of lies. It's a snake pit, full of men in official hats bickering over trivial nonsense, arguing for hours about how many tea leaves belong in a cup. I learned this lesson the hard way, by sheer accident. I was never supposed to be at the morning court session. I'd just gotten lost, wandering around looking for the kitchen to steal some snacks. Little Turnip trotted at my heels, his tail wagging so hard his whole body shook, as if he owned the palace. I took a wrong turn and stumbled into a massive hall, big enough to fit my entire village. The atmosphere inside was so tense you could snap it like a twig. It felt like one wrong word would get you beheaded on the spot. I froze. Rows of ministers turned to stare at me in unison. Silence! A eunuch shrieked. Oh, so this isn't the kitchen, I realized out loud. Dozens of pairs of eyes bore into me. Some coughed awkwardly, others whispered behind their hands. Isn't that Companion Liang? Xiaoyan stood at the front of the hall, clad in a golden dragon robe, his face as impassive as a block of ice. When he saw me, a flicker of panic crossed his eyes, then quickly melted into amusement. Liang Yun, what are you doing here? His voice was calm, but there was a faint plea hidden beneath the surface. Please don't cause trouble. Looking for food, I said honestly. Waiting for the maids to bring breakfast takes forever, slower than the sunrise. The entire hall went dead silent. Ministers dropped their memorials in shock. Some even started muttering prayers under their breath. I've always hated awkward silences. So I added, nice to meet you all, though. Bit tense in here, isn't it? What are you arguing about? A general cleared his throat, looking like he wanted to make me vanish into thin air. Your Majesty, we were discussing the route for transporting grain to the northern border. Oh, military logistics. My favorite breakfast topic, I said, striding boldly into the center of the hall. Companion Liang, Xiaoyan hissed a warning. Too late. I'd already spotted the maps spread out on the table. The proposed route was a disaster. The supply line was supposed to cross a mountain even goats couldn't climb. This wasn't grain transport, it was a suicide mission. I pointed at the map, not mincing my words. You're going to send grain through that pass? That road floods half the year. By the time the supplies arrive, your soldiers will have drowned and become fish food. Shift 2 valleys east. There's a local trade route there. Shorter, safer, and cheaper. The hall fell so quiet you could hear a pin drop. The general's face turned purple with rage, his beard puffing out like an angry toad. Companion Liang speaks nonsense. This is a matter of military strategy. How dare a rustic villager meddle in it? I think the general's brain has turned to mush. That plan's so bad, you should carve it on your tombstone. Ministers gasped in unison. Fans slipped from trembling hands. Xiao Yan's lips twitched, his face a picture of barely contained laughter. Seated high above the throne was a man in a dragon robe. Yes, Xiao Yan's father, the retired emperor. He was watching me with great interest, like I was some fascinating new toy. Tell me, Companion Liang, the retired emperor drawled, who was your teacher? How do you come to know such matters of military supply? I bowed respectfully. Your Majesty, hunger is the best teacher. When you're starving, you learn to find the easiest path pretty quickly. Someone behind me choked on a laugh. Xiao Yan stood at the front, his face ashen, looking like he wanted to crawl into a crack in the floor and disappear. To my shock, the retired emperor burst out laughing, a loud, genuine guffaw. Delightful, absolutely delightful. He waved a hand. General, do as Companion Liang suggests. He might just be right. And just like that, Liang Yun, professional slacker and part-time mountain philosopher, accidentally rewrote the entire empire's military supply route. After the court session ended, I was escorted back to Xiao Yan's study. The door slammed shut behind me. Xiao Yan pinched the bridge of his nose, looking utterly defeated. Do you realize your crime? You dared to barge into the imperial court, with a dog in tow. Correction, the dog ran in first. I was just following him. I leaned against a pillar, crossing my arms and meeting his gaze. Liang Yun, you're welcome. By the way, I just saved the lives of hundreds of thousands of your soldiers. He fixed his eyes on me. How dare you humiliate a general in front of father? He's the one making a fool of himself with that tattered map. I shot back at once. He shook his head, but the corners of his lips twitched upward despite his effort, betraying his true feelings. The ministers will probably gossip about this for weeks. Let them talk. They've got to find something to kill time anyway, I said nonchalantly. He sighed in resignation, a sigh I knew all too well. I loved deliberately riling him up to this flustered state. You have no idea how dangerous this palace is. I know. I just can't be bothered to play these petty power games with them, I replied softly. Our eyes locked. The air hung thick with an indescribable tension, mingled with curiosity and perhaps a hint of unspoken admiration. After a long moment, he averted his gaze. Don't step foot in the council hall again. Father won't always find your antics amusing, he finally admonished. Next time I'll bring snacks. I grinned cheekily. He let out a low chuckle. I truly don't know whether to lock you up or thank you. Why not do both? Life's more fun that way, I suggested. That night, sleep eluded me. The sprawling palace was unnervingly quiet, its opulence feeling hollow, its stillness suffocating. Thoughts of freedom churned in my mind like a bird fluttering frantically against a glass window. So I climbed up to the roof. It wasn't that hard, really. The palace guards were used to the prim and proper nobles, not a wild child like me who'd grown up running mountains and had a knack for balance. I sat on the ridge, gazing down at the sea of lanterns below. The entire empire glowed under a round, silvery moon. Radish curled up beside me, snoring softly. Watch out for fleas on the palace tiles, I whispered, scratching behind his ears. You shouldn't be here. I didn't even flinch. Xiao Yu was always like this, a shadow lingering around, silently disapproving of every choice I made. He climbed up onto the roof too, his robes trailing behind him like flowing moonlight. Neither should you, I said. I can't sleep, he murmured flatly. I bet the dragon bed's too stiff for you, must be suffocating, I teased. He shot me a sidelong glance. You'll never change. Nope, it's in my blood, I said proudly. We sat in silence for a while, the night wind rustling through the tiles. From up here, the world seemed to shrink, and he no longer felt as distant as he did in the daylight. I never thanked you, he finally said. For what? Ruining your court session? For being right. And for surviving, he replied. I smirked triumphantly. You're welcome, though I'd still rather have breakfast now. A faint smile tugged at his lips. I'll have someone prepare it for you. Silence fell again, but this time it was comfortable, wrapped in an unspoken understanding. His hand brushed mine accidentally. Or perhaps it wasn't an accident at all. The touch was fleeting, gentle, yet it made my heart skip a beat. Careful, Your Highness. If anyone sees you holding hands with your notorious study companion, the ministers might just explode, I said. Instead of pulling away, he whispered, "Let them fume." I turned to meet his gaze. Moonlight traced the sharp lines of his profile, calm, steady, and unfairly handsome. For a moment, I was lost for words. Radish yawned loudly, shattering the tender tension between us. I burst out laughing, the sound echoing awkwardly in the quiet night. "You, me, and this little dog. We almost look like a proper royal family," I said. Xiao Yu laughed. "A real family. Small, quiet, and warm. Maybe this empire could use a little chaos," he said. I grinned. "You're starting to sound like me." He looked out at the glowing city. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing." This time, I didn't argue. The stars above didn't care who wore a crown or held a title. In this stolen moment, neither did we. If you ever wonder how long it takes for a palace to descend into chaos, the answer is 2 weeks. To be precise, 2 weeks after I adopted 6 stray cats. I had my reasons, of course. Radish had seemed so lonely, and he was always such a sociable soul. Besides, I was bored out of my mind, and boredom always led me to trouble. At first, the kittens were fluffy, soft, and utterly adorable, though their eyes held a constant air of suspicion. But before long, they multiplied like palace edicts, more and more each day. Within days, the entire palace had turned into a fluffy little rebel stronghold. Radish was over the moon, strutting around like a mighty little general, leading his feline army everywhere he went. The palace servants, however, were far from pleased. "Master Liang." The cats tore up the tribute silk, a bold maid reported breathlessly. I didn't even look up from my breakfast. "Good taste. Tell them to aim for the gold one next time," I said. The maid paled and scurried away. By the 3rd day, I'd become the most feared person in the palace. Not because I held any real power, but because no matter where you went, you'd step on a cat toy within 10 steps. Xiao Yu, though, remained as calm as ever, calm to the point of being suspicious. I knew him well enough to tell he was seething inside. He summoned me to his study, his face giving away nothing. "You've turned the palace upside down," he said. "I prefer to call it the Palace Amusement Enhancement Program," I corrected. He blinked slowly, as if forcing down his anger to maintain his royal composure. "The Minister of Rights submitted a memorial accusing you of letting your pets destroy an important document." "That's a load of nonsense," I said. Before the words left my mouth, Radish trotted in, holding a tattered piece of parchment in his mouth. We both stared at him. My bad," I said sheepishly. "Liang Yun," he said, his voice eerily calm. "Technically, it was the dog," I defended myself. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "Until further notice, you're confined to the palace grounds. No leaving," he ordered. "What?" "Consider it a chance to reflect on your misdeeds," he said. "Reflect on my misdeeds? This is the treatment for traitors, not for a genius animal trainer like me." I protested loudly, but the prince's mind was made up. He was like a wall of ice and duty, unmovable. "Fine. If I couldn't go out, I'd just find some fun inside." On the 2nd day of my confinement, I decided the palace staff needed a little exercise. So I gathered a few maids and guards in the courtyard, picked up a broomstick, and held it like a sword. "Lesson 1, how to stand up to arrogant nobles who bully others," I announced. They laughed, until I demonstrated my moves, and their laughter died instantly. Who knew a broomstick could be so formidable in the right hands? Word spread like wildfire. Within a week, half the palace servants were sneaking out to attend my classes. I called it freedom training. They said it was equal parts terrifying and thrilling. On a whim, I wrote a little essay titled The Declaration of Freedom, mostly mocking bureaucratic red tape and complaining about how tedious court etiquette was bad for digestion. I left copies lying around everywhere for fun. 3 days later, half the palace was reciting my masterpiece. The Minister of Personnel accused me of spreading heresy. I retorted that he had no sense of humor. Xiao Yu finally lost his patience. He stormed into the courtyard just as I was teaching a maid how to use a tray as a shield. "Liang Yun." His voice was cold enough to freeze fire. "Your Highness, care to join the class? You could use some flexibility training," I smiled brightly. Enough! You've turned my palace into a circus, he shouted. I shrugged. Better than a mausoleum, I said. He strode forward, his eyes blazing with anger. Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused? Father thinks I can't even control my own study companion. I tilted my head. Well, technically, you can't, I said matter-of-factly. Liang Yun, his voice dropped an octave, laced with a dangerous edge. Xiao Yu, I shot back. You should be thanking me. I boosted your staff's morale, after all, I said sweetly. He exhaled sharply, anger warring with another complex emotion in his eyes. You treat everything like a joke. Life's too short not to have fun. How else am I supposed to survive all your stupid rules? I said. Not everything can be laughed off, he countered. Maybe not. But if I can't even laugh anymore, I'll suffocate in this place. My voice softened a little. He froze, the anger in his eyes fading away. The tension in the air eased. He began, then trailed off, as if he couldn't find the right words. He stepped closer, until my back pressed against the wall. His hand slammed against the stone beside my head, his breath brushing my cheek, steady, yet faintly trembling. Xiao Yu, you're too close, I whispered. He didn't move. You're driving me crazy, he said hoarsely. That just means you're still human, alive and breathing, I replied softly. His gaze fell to my lips, and time seemed to stand still. For a heartbeat, I thought he was going to kiss me. But he stopped, mere inches away. His jaw tightened, and once again, duty won out. I could feel his breath, his hesitation, his suffocating self-restraint. Your Highness, one should see things through to the end, I murmured. He jerked back as if burned. Go back to your quarters. His voice was raw. Afraid of the servants gossiping? I said lightly, even as my heart raced wildly. Afraid that next time, I won't be able to hold back, he said. These words left me utterly tongue-tied. For once, I couldn't come up with a single witty retort. He turned and walked away, his back still straight and impeccable, yet radiating an unrelenting tension. Radish trotted in, tilting his head as if asking what had just happened. Stop looking at me like that. I'm just as confused as you are, I told him. Radish yawned. Typical royal nonsense. That night, I suffered from insomnia again. The palace fell deathly silent once more, a calm before the storm. I sat by the window, gazing out at the garden. A few cats slunk through the shadows like ghosts. In the distance, the night watchman murmured about divine punishment. Maybe he was right. I really was a walking curse sent by heaven. When I first arrived here, I had nothing and nowhere to go. Yet somehow, I'd gotten tangled up in court intrigues, stirred up a hornet's nest of trouble, and met a crown prince so stubborn he made my heart ache. I sighed. Freedom isn't all it's cracked up to be, I said to Radish. Though, sometimes it is. Radish wagged his tail, looking thoroughly unimpressed. Oh well, when soldiers come, meet them with generals. When floods rise, block them with earth. We'll get through this somehow. From the corner of my eye, I thought I saw Xiaoyu standing at the other end of the palace, also awake all night, lost in the same thoughts as me. You'd think after the cat chaos, the manifesto scandal, and almost kissing the crown prince twice, the palace folks would have learned to keep me away from serious business. But no, an urgent dispatch arrived from the border. Rebellion had broken out. The cause was simple enough. Crippling grain taxes and corrupt local officials had sparked the anger of thousands of soldiers. The entire court descended into chaos. Ministers scurried about like headless chickens, generals shouted over each other, and servants trembled like pigeons in a storm. Naturally, I decided this was the perfect time to sneak into the War Council chamber. I had my reasons, didn't I? No one had explicitly forbidden me from coming. Technically, I was still banned from formal meetings, but there was no rule against lurking in the corner to eavesdrop, right? Besides, I'd been bored out of my mind for 3 straight days. It was torture. Radish was on lookout duty. I tied up my hair, borrowed a servant's uniform, and swaggered right in. The trick was simple. If you looked confident enough, everyone would assume you belonged there. The atmosphere in the council chamber was as heavy as a pressure cooker. Xiaoyu sat near the head of the table, his face an emotionless mask. Maps covered the floor, generals bickered furiously over troop movements, and ministers hurled accusations at one another. The emperor sat on his throne, his expression calm yet exuding an intimidating aura of authority, as if he were deciding who deserved to lose their heads. I slipped into a corner, picked up a tray, and pretended to pour tea. The first 10 minutes went smoothly, but as I listened, I nearly choked on my tea. They were actually planning to send 20,000 troops straight through a mountain pass. Every merchant who traveled north and south knew it was a death trap with no return. I set down the teapot a little too hard, and every head turned toward me. A general scowled. "Who's this insolent servant, daring to make noise here?" "I'm just a humble tea server," I bowed respectfully, but I venture to say that marching troops through that pass will lead to more funerals than victories. The chamber fell completely silent. Xiaoyu's breath hitched, his gaze locking onto me. Shock flickered in his eyes as he recognized me, followed by that familiar, wordless reproach, as if saying, "Liang Yun, you're causing trouble again." The general who'd spoken earlier puffed up like an angry toad. "How dare you question my strategy?" "I dare not, Your Excellency." "I only speak the truth," I replied. "It seems you've forgotten the river to the south. It floods every spring without fail. Instead of marching your men straight into an ambush, why not use the river to cut off the rebel supply lines?" A murmur rippled through the room. The Emperor raised an eyebrow. "How do you know all this?" I bowed again, silently praying my disguise wouldn't be blown. "I heard it from a friend who's terrible at gambling but brilliant when it comes to geography." Xiaoyu's jaw tightened, but a faint, suppressed smile glinted in his eyes. The Emperor leaned back in his throne. "Continue." I pointed at the map and spoke confidently. "Move the main army eastward, then send a small detachment to circle around through the forest. Avoid direct confrontation. Cut off their grain supplies, wear down their morale, and you can win the war without heavy casualties." The hall was dead quiet. After a long moment, the Emperor cracked a faint smile. "It seems even the tea boys in this palace are full of hidden talents these days." Xiaoyu stood up and walked forward calmly and composedly. "Father, I was just about to propose this very plan." My jaw nearly dropped to the floor. "What did he just say?" The Emperor nodded. "Approved. We'll record this as your strategy." The meeting continued, and Xiaoyu didn't glance in my direction, not even once. When no one was looking, I slipped out quietly, with Radish strutting proudly at my heels, his tail held high as if we just toppled an entire dynasty. 2 weeks later, the rebellion was crushed swiftly and cleanly, with minimal losses. The entire court rejoiced. The Emperor praised the Crown Prince for his wisdom, courage, and brilliant strategy. As for me, I might as well have never existed in this glorious victory. I wasn't angry. Well, maybe a little. Mostly, I was confused. Xiaoyu never mentioned it, not a word of thanks, not even a sarcastic remark. He just kept his distance from me, as if I were a stranger. So once again, I barged into his study. When he looked up and saw me, he wasn't the least bit surprised, only tired. "You shouldn't be here." "Technically, I shouldn't be anywhere. After all, I'm always under house arrest in this palace," I shot back. "By the way, you're not just reckless, you're ungrateful too." That finally got his attention. "Ungrateful?" "Absolutely. I helped you put down the border rebellion, and you took all the credit. What did I get? Not even a bowl of noodles." "It's ridiculous." The corners of his lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close enough. "You never should have been there in the first place, Liang Yun." "Clearly I should have been. Otherwise, you'd still be arguing with a bunch of idiots who can't even remember a river exists," I retorted immediately. His voice rose sharply. "You almost got caught. And if someone had found out, what? That you took my advice?" "It's a little late for that now." I cut him off. He sighed heavily and rubbed his temples. "You have no idea how dangerous court politics can be. If the ministers suspect that I'm listening to you about everything, they'll gossip. They already do that nonstop anyway." He looked up, and for the first time, I saw vulnerability flash in his eyes. "They'll use you against me." Those words silenced me instantly. He stood up and walked slowly across the room, his steps steady and resolute. "I didn't take the credit for greed. I did it to protect you." "Protect me? By locking me up in this palace and driving me bored to death?" I asked with a laugh. His voice softened. "By keeping you alive." Those 2 words carried the weight of 1,000 pounds. No sarcasm, no royal arrogance, just raw sincerity. God, Xiaoyu's honest words were rarer than a polite cat. We fell silent for a long time, with only Radish's soft snoring coming from the doorway. Finally, I spoke quietly. You could have just told me the truth. I knew you'd argue. You're right about that. But at least I would have appreciated the gesture. He took another step closer, and the tension in the air tightened once more. His face was a conflicted mix of calm restraint and fragile helplessness, and it made my heart skip a beat. Liang-yun, you really are going to drive me insane, he whispered. Likewise, I replied lightly, my throat feeling inexplicably dry. His hand lifted slightly, as if he wanted to touch my cheek, but froze halfway. Just like before, always pulling back at the critical moment. So I did something no rational person would do. I leaned forward and pressed a quick kiss to the corner of his mouth. He froze completely. I grinned triumphantly. That's a reward for telling such a decent lie for once. His eyes widened, then narrowed. I was already turning to leave. I glanced over my shoulder and called out, next time you need help, just say so. It'll save us both the trouble of pretending. Silence followed, then a soft, genuine laugh echoed behind me. I paused at the door and looked back. Xiaoyu was watching me, a smile on his face. Not the polite, practiced smile of a crown prince, but Xiaoyu's smile, warm, real, and utterly his own. That smile made my heart ache all over again. Stop looking at me like that. Otherwise, I might start thinking you actually like me, I said half-jokingly. He didn't say a word. He just kept looking at me, his gaze silent yet more unsettling than any words could be. In the weeks that followed, something shifted quietly between us. He still scolded me, still sighed in resignation when I pranked the ministers, but there was a new warmth in his eyes. He began to seek me out in the garden at dusk. I'd often lie there with Radish, lazily soaking up the sun. Sometimes we talked about court affairs, sometimes we said nothing at all, just sitting together in comfortable silence. Once, I told him a silly joke that made him laugh out loud. The sound was so sudden that I forgot how the joke ended. Maybe that was the moment I realized, somewhere between our sharp-tongued bickering and careful, tentative survival, I'd fallen for the very man I'd sworn to tease for the rest of my life. Of course, I'd never admit it. After all, where was the fun in that? I always said this palace life would be the death of me sooner or later. Turns out I wasn't exaggerating. It all began on an unusually quiet night. Unnervingly quiet. Radish didn't bark, the cats didn't tussle, not even the servants who normally gossiped about my blunders made a peep. I should have sensed something was wrong. The second omen came in the form of a dagger that nearly sliced off my ear. I dodged sideways in the nick of time, and the blade thudded firmly into the wall. Ugh, another assassin. The day doesn't feel complete without someone trying to stab me, I muttered under my breath. 3 shadowy figures dropped down from the roof, their faces masked, blades glinting coldly in the darkness. They moved with ruthless precision and agility, royal palace assassins, the cream of the crop, well-trained killers. Radish growled, baring his teeth. I nodded toward the corner. Stay there. Don't come out, or you'll get the carpet dirty. The assassins charged at me all at once. Too bad they didn't know I was far more than just a rowdy, troublemaking study companion. Before entering the palace, I'd survived bounty hunters' manhunts, outwitted corrupt guards, and even outsmarted a fanatical goose farmer with my own wits. To me, these assassins were nothing but fancy-dressed amateurs. The one on the left struck first, his moves laughably predictable. I ducked, grabbed his wrist with a backward twist, and hurled him violently onto the table. The man on the right tried to sneak up behind me. I snatched a teacup and smashed it squarely against his forehead. The last attacker leaped into the air, striking a flashy offensive pose. I timed it perfectly and kicked him hard in the ribs. In less than a minute, all 3 assassins crumpled to the floor like rag dolls, unconscious. I sighed, brushing the dust off my sleeves. Next time send someone more competent. I get bored easily. But my playful mood faded quickly. Someone in this palace wanted me dead. Not disgraced, not exiled, dead. I'd endured the whispers, the snide remarks, even the poisoned tea that had been mistakenly delivered to me. But this was different. The thought of freedom flared up in my chest again. This time, I decided to heed its call. Before dawn broke, I packed my bags, taking only what mattered most, my sword, a few copper coins, and Radish. Everything else could rot away in this gilded cage. The palace gate loomed ahead, tall, solemn, and silent. A light drizzle began to fall, cold and biting, showing no mercy. The rain soaked through my robes, plastering my hair to my face, leaving me in a sorry state. Perfect weather for making impulsive decisions. Radish whimpered softly. I know he'll be furious. But better that than him attending my funeral, I muttered. I hesitated for just a second, glancing back at the towering palace, at the faint candlelight flickering from Xiaoyu's study. Maybe he was still awake, buried in his memorials, completely unaware that his study companion was about to flee far away. Or maybe he knew all along. Let's go, before I change my mind. But just as I stepped over the palace threshold, a voice cut through the rain, calling out to me, Liang Yun. I froze in my tracks. Of course he'd come. He always found me. Xiaoyu stood at the end of the path, soaked to the bone, his cloak heavy with rainwater. His eyes blazed brightly, as if he'd stepped straight out of a fevered dream. You should stay in the palace. You'll catch a cold, contract a noble's elegant illness, I sighed. He didn't answer, just walked toward me, step by steady step. You're leaving. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. Sharp eyes, as befits a future king. You see everything, I quipped. His expression darkened. After everything we've been through, you think you can just vanish without a word? Of course I can. It's my specialty. Liang Yun. His voice was hoarse, tinged with an almost imperceptible tremor. Why? I turned my head away, unable to meet his gaze. Because I'm tired of watching my back in every corridor. Because in your lovely court, there are people who think my death would be a great thing. Because I never belonged here. Xiaoyu. At the sound of his name on my lips, his body tensed almost imperceptibly. You think I can't protect you? You can. But to do that, you'd have to upend everything you've worked so hard to build, for someone as unruly as me. I'd rather have a lifetime of freedom than be the reason you lose everything. The rain poured harder, the cold drops swallowing the silence between us. He took another step closer. You've saved my life again and again. Do you think I'd just watch you leave? I thought you'd be smart enough to let me go, I whispered. Smart? You call this smart? Running away from me? Is that what you call smart? There was a bitter edge to his tone. I'm not running away from you. I'm running from these palace walls, from all these tedious rules, from endless kowtowing and bowing. You fit here. You know you do. I never did. I cut him off sharply. He suddenly reached out and grabbed my wrist. You fit by my side. I almost laughed out loud. Don't make promises you can't keep. I'm not promising anything. I'm not lying. His voice cracked, the words catching in his throat. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, teetering on the brink of a terrible fall. I love you. Finally, he said the three words, soft but clear. The rain pattered around us, drowning out the world, everything except those three words. I froze completely, my heart tumbling into chaos. Xiaoyu, you shouldn't have said that, I whispered. It's the truth. I can't lie to myself anymore. I shook my head frantically, searching for a hint of a joke, for a witty line to defuse the heavy tension, to make all of this feel less real. You're soaked to the bone and exhausted. You're delirious. That's why you're talking nonsense. Maybe I am, but it's my choice to be delirious. He took another step closer, raising his hand to brush my cheek, his fingertips trembling slightly. Tell me you don't feel anything for me. Just say the words, and I'll let you go. Reason told me this was the best option. Lie, smile, then vanish without a trace. But I'd never been reasonable where he was concerned. You're such an idiot. You've gone and made everything so complicated, I cursed softly. His breath hitched, and then he leaned down and kissed me. The kiss was anything but gentle, only raw longing, tangled emotions, and pent-up frustration. It was a confession and a farewell, all in one. The cold rain poured down around us, sending a shiver of electricity through my skin. His hand slid to the back of my neck, and I clutched his soaked robes tightly. In that moment, the entire world disappeared. After what felt like an eternity, I pulled back slightly, gasping for breath. Do you really have to ruin my freedom? He gave me a faint smile, sad yet sincere. You were the one who first shattered my peace of mind. The words cut through all my defenses like a knife. I wanted to laugh, to retort, to say something cheeky like you're welcome, but my throat felt tight, and not a single word would come out. I took a step back, putting distance between us. If you really love me, let me go, before I start hoping this place could be my home. He didn't move, just stood there in the rain, water dripping from his eyelashes. The pain in his eyes felt like it was tearing me apart. I knew I was breaking his heart. Finally, he nodded slowly. Go. But remember this, I will never stop looking for you. I never expected you to give up. I forced a smile, one that didn't reach my eyes. I turned around, whistled for Radish, and strode resolutely into the pouring rain. Every step felt like a betrayal. Every drop of rain was a searing reminder of my guilt, burning my skin. I couldn't help but glance back. Just once. Xiaoyu still stood there, alone, like a solitary statue in the downpour. In that moment, for the first time in my life, I hated the freedom I'd chased for so long. You think running away from a crown prince would be the end of the story? Obviously. My story was just beginning to turn into a spectacular court reform movement. When I returned to the palace, yes, I came back. Don't listen to Xiaoyu's nonsense, everything had changed. He was no longer the crown prince. He was the emperor. History would remember him as the youngest ruler the realm had ever seen. He ruled with unwavering resolve and poise, never hesitating to be ruthless when necessary. And of course, he was just as handsome as ever. Not to brag, but I deserved all the credit for his growth spurt. When I marched into the throne hall, mud caked on my trousers and Radish at my heels, the entire court stared at me like I was a ghost come back to haunt them. Radish strutted beside me, tail wagging proudly. Aren't you supposed to be gone? A minister gasped, his voice sharp with outrage. I tried. But your emperor's assassins are so incompetent, they just couldn't kill me, I said casually. When the new emperor saw me, he nearly dropped his writing brush. We locked eyes, him in his golden threaded dragon robe, me standing on the spotless floor, dripping wet from head to toe. You're back sooner than I expected, he said coolly. Missed you. Also, I wanted to check if being emperor is wearing you out, I grinned. Besides, I left without your permission, so I don't need your invitation to come back. We're even now, I said, spreading my arms wide. He looked like he wanted to say more, but just then, Radish jumped up and landed in his arms, tail wagging furiously. That was the end of the emperor's regal composure. The entire court watched, dumbfounded, as their untouchable sovereign got his chin licked by a muddy dog. It was a sight to behold. Ever since then, life was thrown into chaos once again. Somehow, I'd become His Majesty's unofficial chief strategic advisor. The title sounded fancy enough, but in plain terms, it meant I sat around every day cracking sarcastic jokes, and occasionally, those jokes turned into actual laws and decrees. Take one incident for example. A minister proposed doubling the peasants' tax burden. I said, sure you can, if you want the common folks to pelt you with stones instead of paying their grain tribute. Xiaoyu didn't even bat an eye. He picked up his brush and signed off on the order right away. A week later, a new tax reform plan was issued, one that was far more lenient to the people and optimized the grain distribution logistics. Guess who got blamed for it in the end? Me. Of course. The emperor's study companion is far too arrogant with his favor, meddling in state affairs, the officials whispered behind my back. The emperor's study companion has very sharp ears, though. I leaned over to them and murmured in reply at a banquet one evening. The gossip never stopped, but I didn't care anymore. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was just scraping by in this palace. I felt truly alive. And Xiaoyu had changed too. He still carried the imperial majesty about him, but whenever we were alone, he'd loosen his collar, lean back in his chair, and laugh a genuine, unrestrained laugh. That laugh always sent a little flutter through my heart, like sunlight breaking through dark clouds, warm and brilliant. One night, we were going through memorials together. He was reading them earnestly, while I was dozing off by his side. I'm going to revoke the house arrest order on your position as study companion, he said suddenly. I pried one eye open. What did you say? From now on, you can come and go as you please. No need for bodyguards, no curfew to abide by. I stared at him in stunned silence. Are you bribing me to stay? He gave me a faint smile. No. This time, I want to give you real freedom. I fell quiet for a long while. Freedom wasn't something you stole. It was something someone gave you willingly. It was a feeling I'd never known before. You always have to ruin my perfectly planned exit ceremonies, I grumbled softly. He chuckled. Can you blame me? You always come back anyway. Touché. That was our unspoken agreement. I could wander wherever I wanted, whenever I wanted. I'd roam the countryside, sip cheap rice wine, and take lazy naps under trees. Every time I left, he'd put on an angry face, then secretly send 10 royal guards to follow me. Those big men in shiny armor would hide behind bushes, thinking I couldn't spot them. Every time I returned, the entire palace seemed to light up a little brighter. He never said a word about it, but I could feel it. And me? I liked to balance out his overly orderly life with a little bit of chaos. Like today, for instance. The morning court session was well underway. The ministers were droning on and on about the same old topics: grain supplies, trade policies, border rebellions, each putting on a show of being deeply concerned for the nation. Xiaoyu sat on the dragon throne, as calm as ever, looking like he was listening intently, yet also like he wasn't paying attention at all. Just then, the great hall doors were thrown open with a bang. "Sorry, I'm late. Traffic was a nightmare. Ran into a parade of geese," I announced loudly, striding in with my head held high. I had Radish in one arm and a bunch of wildflowers clutched in the other. Mud caked all over my boots. The entire court froze. You could have heard a pin drop. One minister was so enraged he stammered, "Why you? How dare you? How dare I what?" I shot back, marching unapologetically up the polished jade steps. "Carry on with the meeting. Don't mind me." Xiaoyu's expression was so dark it could have curdled milk. "Liang Yun, you are disrupting a state council meeting," he said in that distinctive, tightly controlled tone of his. "Ah. Good. Disrupting order is my specialty." He sighed in resignation. "What's that in your hand?" "A gift for an emperor who's forgotten how to go outside and soak up the sun," I said, tossing the wildflowers at him casually. The bouquet landed right on his lap, perfectly on target. Radish yipped happily in my arms, as if to approve of the move. The ministers all turned pale, as if I'd just thrown a treasonous edict at him instead of a bunch of flowers. Xiaoyu looked down at the blooms on his lap, then back up at me. "You tramped into the imperial hall covered in mud, just to give me a bunch of weeds?" he asked, each word slow and deliberate. "These aren't weeds," I corrected him. "They're flowers, unruly, defying authority. Just like me." A few younger officials couldn't hold back their snickers, then quickly covered their mouths and pretended to cough. The corners of His Majesty's lips twitched twice, then he finally broke. A faint smile tugged at the edge of his mouth. "You're incorrigible." I've heard that one before. Before anyone could react, I crossed the hall, stepped up to him, stood on tiptoes, and pressed a quick kiss to his lips. A short, gentle, and unmistakably public kiss. The collective gasp that followed could have blown the roof off the palace. As I pulled back a step, I saw Xiaoyu's ears turn bright red, almost crimson, but he didn't push me away. Instead, he gave me a slow, dangerous smile. "Liang Yun, you are testing the patience of an emperor." I grinned. "But you're enjoying every second of it, aren't you?" The ministers looked like they were about to faint on the spot. Radish wagged his tail cheerfully. And this mighty ruler, my once rigid, rule-abiding beloved, just shook his head in resignation and announced in a clear voice, "Court is adjourned." The officials scattered like they'd been granted amnesty, fleeing faster than bandits spotting a dragon. The hall emptied out gradually. Xiaoyu stared down at the wildflowers in his hand, then lifted his gaze to meet mine. "Wherever you go, you bring chaos in your wake." "Chaos is good for the mind and body," I said. "Keeps your ministers young at heart." He raised an eyebrow. "What about you?" "Me? I'm immortal, obviously. Timeless charm and all," I declared triumphantly. He laughed again, a real, hearty laugh. He reached out and pulled me into his arms, not caring one bit that my muddy clothes were smudging his imperial dragon robe. "I told you once, you look lovely wearing flowers," I murmured softly. He leaned down, his voice warm and firm, "For my ears only. Only the flowers you pick for me are lovely." Radish barked again, as if to proclaim that this line was worthy of being recorded in the annals of history. Right there, in the grand, solemn imperial hall, the most self-disciplined ruler of the empire kissed his free-spirited, unbridled study companion. Both of us smelled of dirt and sunshine. Freedom and order, wildness and imperial power, somehow, impossibly, they had merged into one. If anyone ever asks me how a wandering vagabond tamed an emperor, I'll tell them the truth. I didn't tame him. We just learned to walk side by side. Of course, I still disappear for a week or two every now and then come crashing back into the hall with a bunch of wildflowers and a mischievous grin. But that's just part of the balance, isn't it? After all, Some people are good at building empires. Others are here to make sure those empires never grow too dull and lifeless. And I, Liang Yun, once a drifter, accidental study companion, part-time revolutionary, and full-time troublemaker, finally found my perfect life. Unruly, free, and loved.